Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us this morning. We have Alex Dykes here with Intercoastal Mortgage, and he is going to go over our crazy market and what to expect coming up, or his projections, I guess. But thanks for joining us this morning. Alex, take it away.
Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for having me and letting me take up an hour of your day. So, as everybody knows by now, this market that we're in is just crazy. We've got a shortage of inventory, we've got rates all over the place, we've got a pandemic brewing still, which hopefully is on the decline. But I recently watched and have been doing a lot. Well, I've been doing a lot of market research, obviously, to try to understand where our industry is going over the next year to 5 years, because one, it's good to know job security, and two, it's also just good to know from a marketing and sales perspective what we're looking at, and how we need to be adjusting to keep up with trends. So I've watched recently a video by Mortgage Market Guide, and it was a training done for lenders that was just really insightful. And I think, the information that I gleaned from that, as well as a couple other sources, will be really helpful for everybody. So, as you probably know, rates have continued to increase over the past month or two. So, we are no longer in the 2% range for a 30-year fixed. Right now, as of today, a 20% down, 800 credit score, 30-year fixed mortgage is between 3 and 3.25. So, while we're not in 2% anymore, or even at 2.5 like we were midsummer, the low 3% range is still really good on a 30-year fixed loan for historically. So that's kind of where we stand as of today. Now, I want to start off with talking about what makes rates move and what makes them volatile. I think that that's a really good foundation for kind of the next several months and probably at least a year that we're going to be looking at. So let's start with the stock market. The stock market, as everybody knows, has been booming. You have all of the stuff going on with GameStop and with new investors getting into the market, and it's that, coupled with a lot of the economic stimulus packages that have been happening. The stock market's been doing really well over the past couple of months, and we're starting to see that glimpse of recovery hitting the market. Now, obviously, there's off days, but we're starting to see what's probably going to be a really strong market moving into the spring and summer. Now, there's been a lot of questions of, is it sustainable, right? Generally, there's been a lot of indicators that are showing the stock market looking a lot like it did before the .com and the 2008 recessions. So while it's not like a pull all your money out of the market type of situation, it's definitely a keep your antennas up, because historically growth in this amount with the stock market has been unstable, and it just can't continue on with that same pattern, because it has to correct at some point. So they are predicting that we're going to have a recession, probably starting mid 2022, early to mid 2022. Obviously, nobody can say when. It could be earlier, it could be a little later. But what that's going to cause over the next couple of months, with as strong as the stock market is, and probably through the rest of 2021, is rates are probably going to continue to rise. Generally, when the stock market is doing really well, especially when we're going to start seeing a huge economic recovery from people getting vaccinated, things opening up, things getting back to normal, rates will continue to rise because there's not as much money in the bond market. Now, when this all flips over and the stocks start to fall, investors will move all of that money over to the bond market because it's a more stable and secure and long-term investment. It obviously doesn't provide as many returns, so that's why people prefer the stock market to actually make money. But the bond market will be the safe haven for a lot of the money out there right now. Now, when bonds start getting purchased and the bond market starts getting strengthened, we see a dip in rates. So, you know, if you would have asked me this even a month ago, I probably would have told you you're crazy. But the insane thing to wrap your head around is that while we're going to see continued rate increases through probably the rest of 2021, we are most likely going to see them fall again in 2022 to potentially even lower than they were in this year. They're predicting another refi boom in 2022. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's actually, I think, going to be the forecast of a really strong market to come. You know, I think that 2021, as things kind of fluctuate and then things kind of start to resume whatever the new normal is, are going to be a little more volatile. But come 2022, we're going to probably see a recession, and with that, a lowering in rates again. Now, the reason we're probably going to see a recession is that a couple of things. The federal government has continued to pump a lot of money out there to people for obvious reasons, right? It's a good thing. It helps people keep stable and you know, make sure the economy doesn't completely tank on us. But what that's going to cause is, initially, especially with the new $1.9 trillion bill that just got passed, it's going to cause a lot of cash to hit the market that didn't exist before, and it's going to give people a lot of buying power. However, when that dries up and all of that money is gone, we're going to start to see things slow down, which is why they're projecting kind of that, you know, early signs of what we're going to see as a recession. Now, the other piece at play with the rates is your inflation rate, right? So when we pump a lot of money into the economy, coupled with a supply chain issue like we've been having during the pandemic, where prices are already driven up because there's supply chain issues. Lumber and building in our industry is a perfect example. I'm sure you've all heard that lumber prices have like tripled. Most of it is because of factory shutdowns and supply chain issues caused by COVID shutdowns. So that, coupled with all of that money hitting the market, we're going to start to see inflation, which is going to be another piece driving rates up throughout the rest of the year and into early 2022. However, when all that money dries up, the stock market starts to calm down, and the national debt is as large as it's going to be, inflation is going to fall. And inflation is going to come back in line because you're going to have an opening up of the economy where we're going to have all that supply chain released back into the market. And we're going to have, then people will have less money to spend and won't have as much buying power, which will also cause prices to generally normalize and inflation to slow. So the nice thing is that when inflation slows, rates fall. So we're looking at a couple things that are going to cause this kind of upward and then back down trend. Stock market falling and money moving into the bond market. We're looking at inflation rising over 2021 and then falling again in 2022, which is going to lower our rates back down. And then we're looking at supply chain issues being opened up, which is going to really help everything kind of loosen back up into what it was prior to. So, you know, that's kind of a brief overview of what we're looking at over the next couple of years, really, in 2021 into 2022. I know that's really a lot of technical stuff. Does anybody have any questions at this point? No? Okay.
Don't be shy, everybody.
Hi.
Okay, I would like to ask if somebody is thinking of selling their home, would this be the best time to sell now and then maybe lease for a year and then purchase?
That's a great question. It's actually a great segue into our next talking point. So I'm going to hold off answering that because I'm going to answer it in our next kind of talking points, but that's a great segue. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started into real estate prices?
Hang on one second. Rhonda, did you have a question as well?
I did. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. It took me a second to get me off of mute. Anyway, I'm wondering, you mentioned lumber and building prices, and it is astronomically high right now. So you anticipate that that's going to come down and that will improve the availability of houses?
Well, so here's the thing. I don't know if it will improve the availability. I think it will definitely allow builders to start constructing again. You'll see home flippers hitting the market again, a lot more rehabs going on. However, because the supply chain is going to be released back up. But, I think there is going to be a temporary, it's going to take longer than maybe we're thinking, because if you think about all the people that have been waiting to do stuff until those prices come back down, those are going to clog the market. We're probably going to see continued shortages, and then eventually it will normal out. I think what that's really going to, I think it has less of an impact on our home prices right now and our home availability than our next point, which is the fact that is really what's causing the shortage. And that is we're having a small baby boom right now. And I think a lot of people aren't realizing that.
Oh, okay.
So
when do you think the lumber prices will come back down? You mentioned that everything's going to kind of go back to normal, but lumber's a huge issue right now.
From everything that we're seeing, it's going to be after, we kind of achieve herd immunity. A time frame on that, I'm no expert in that. I think you need a bit of voodoo in there mixed with some economic forecasting.
We had that crystal ball, boy, will we be set.
I think it'll really depend on, how, as they roll out vaccines. Yesterday we got news that the government purchased another 100 million vaccine doses, which should really help the amount of people getting vaccines. And then herd immunity and the COVID numbers dropping. I think once we start to see some big drops and some reopenings, that's going to really be the indicator for us. What that looks like in terms of like percentage of vaccinations or anything like that, that's beyond anything that I know or probably anybody does at this point.
Okay.
I think that it's going to take time, obviously, but from everything I'm reading and everything I'm seeing, I think if we really, that somewhere in the 2022, early 2022 time frame is probably going to be once we start seeing a little bit of normalization.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anything else on the rates? Okay. Oh, I think you're on mute.
With USDA loans and specialty loans, are they going to be as affected as a standard 20% down loan?
Do you mean with the rate fluctuations? Mm-hmm. They are. FHA and VA are historically lower, and USDA falls into that category. They're historically lower than your straight conventional loans. Okay. But for instance, VHDA, I saw VHDA rates over the past month creep up, and like on the FHA product, for instance, from low 2% to 3 even right now. In fact, I locked one yesterday at 3.125. So they are fluctuating just as much as all the other rates. The nice thing is, I think with those, we're not going to see them disappear like we have a lot of the more creative lending programs with COVID, as investors have restricted their programs to reduce their losses and kind of their risk factor. But yeah, those are fluctuating just as much.
Okay.
All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, which is a great segue into our first question, was real estate prices. So as you all know, real estate prices are rising. We have seen a national growth of 10% from 2019 to 2020. And in Roanoke, and the Roanoke Valley, we're actually doing even better at 13%. Now, I know a lot of people, I know this is making a lot of people really nervous, because for those realtors and those agents that were and lenders that were there during that 2006, 2007 build up to the mortgage crisis, we're seeing a lot of repeat of what was happening with home prices. However, I am very happy to say that what the other indicators, that's the only thing in common with the housing bubble. We are not going to have another mortgage crisis if all these other indicators are correct. First of all, we have a really strong lending guideline, really strong federal lending guidelines that did not exist in 2007, 2008. We do no longer have the days of interest-only loans. We no longer have, all the other kind of nasty lending products that were available out there that were really putting people in bad situations. So there's a lot more protections for the consumer, which is great. I think that should have obviously should have existed back then. It would have saved
Exactly.
a lot of heartache. But here, the real reason we're seeing rising prices is inventory shortage. Like everybody knows, people are getting into bidding wars. We're seeing escalation clauses of like $20,000 to sometimes $30,000. We have a factor where 20% of national home offers are cash deals right now, which is really restricting the availability even more to people that are using loans to qualify. And what's causing this is kind of what I mentioned, is we're having a mini baby boom. So if you go back to the 60s, right after the big baby boom generation, right after the post World War II, in the mid 60s, you saw something happen that caused the birth rate to drop significantly. And that was the introduction of birth control and the legalization of abortions. Suddenly, our birth rate in the country through the 60s, 70s, and early 80s dropped almost in half. So we had this, several decade stretch where there just weren't as many households on the market to buy houses. So a great example of that is in 2007, there were 3.7 million homes for sale and only 116 million households in the country. You compare that to today, there's only 1.07 million homes for sale. So a third of what was in 2007, and there's 8 million more households being formed almost annually. Now, the reason that's for that is in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a small baby boom. The economy was booming. People were feeling really good about life. And in general, people started a lot of new families. So we're seeing all of that population, all those children that were born in the late 80s, early 90s, hitting the first time home buyer age, which is 30 to 34. So this is the primary reason we're seeing the market that we're seeing, is there are, in general, about 30% of the market is first time home buyers, or 25 to 30% on a normal year. We're seeing that grow to, they're projecting in the next 2 to 3 years that the first time home buyer market will be upwards of 40 to 45% of the total market share. With that, those 8 million new households that are happening because of that small baby boom need homes, and they're reaching that age where they're ready to purchase for the first time. However, we only have a third of available inventory that we did in 2007 at the start of the mortgage crisis. So one, that's the first indicator that the mortgage crisis and what we're seeing today is so vastly different. The thing that's really causing prices to increase is just pure inventory shortage. Now, from everything I'm reading and everything I'm seeing, we are only starting to get a preview of what's going to happen over the next 5 years. Builders are not going to be able to keep up. People are wealthier than ever, so a lot more people are actually qualified to own homes. And the inventory is just not going to get that much better while we continue to grow the average household size or the average household quantity in the nation, right? So I think we're going to continue to see at least 10% home price growth in the nation over the next probably 2 to 3 years, maybe even longer. Depends on really how long this boomer, like new boomer generation comes into first time home buying. But I think that a lot of people that were around in that bubble are so nervous about advising their clients to pay more. But I learned a really interesting statistic recently. The average increase on an escalation clause, the average time that it takes for people to recoup that equity in their home is 2 months after purchase. So while we're getting people to pay, you know, $5, $10, $15,000 more on some homes, it's really only taking between 2 and 6 months for them to recoup that equity. Coupled with, if you start thinking about the cost of waiting, which with increasing rates and increasing home values, buying is only going to get more expensive the longer you wait. It's such a great tool to be able to advise your clients on why these escalation clauses are okay right now. It's okay to pay more. You know, the other good thing that we're seeing is that nationally, while homes are growing 10%, Roanoke Valley is outpacing them. And I think that's for a couple reasons. I think Roanoke is really starting to come into its own. We're having a renaissance, an economic renaissance that has been long overdue for Roanoke. We're seeing industry moving in. We're seeing people moving here. I mean, gosh, I think half my clients this year have been newcomers and people moving from out of town. And partially because of it, partially because of the industry and the businesses opening and people moving into the valley, but also because medium to small markets like Roanoke are really going to benefit from the pandemic and the work from home change. You know, you're going to have a lot of people in New York, DC, San Francisco, all those big East or West Coast cities that are going to be able to work from home now. And they're going to go, wait a minute, why am I paying $4,500 a month for a 1-bedroom condo or apartment when I could leave and live anywhere for half the price and keep that salary? So I think we're going to see a large migration of people, and we already have started to. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of clients from the Northeastern corridor landing here. I've seen a lot of DC and New York over the past couple of months, but that's going to cause people to keep those large salaries and move into Roanoke and then start spending that money here, which is going to just continue to steamroll our economic kind of revolution. I mean, it's fantastic. It's going to be really good for people here. You know, I know it makes a lot of people that grew up here nervous, and I know it makes a lot of people like, you know, a lot of people don't want Roanoke to change. It's a great sized city and it's a fantastic place to live. It's what drew me here from DC originally. But, you know, I think that the nice thing is that Roanoke has the infrastructure. We just need the housing availability. But hopefully what this will do is cause builders to start building here. And we're talking both downtown and then out in the suburbs in Roanoke County. Hopefully we'll start to see some national builders really pick up steam and doing some planned communities, and some town center type communities, stuff like that, that I think is going to really help the real estate market over the next several years. So, you know, I think in general, what I'm getting at is that I'm really excited for the next decade of growth in Roanoke. I'm really excited to be here and be a part of it. I think it's going to be really special. And I think we in this industry are going to be really crucial in helping that growth, because we're going to be really helping people that are moving here, as well as people that now have newfound economic income because of the result of this being able to transition into new homes. You know, I think it also changes how we look at what markets are going to be up and coming in the city. I've heard a lot of talk about Southeast being kind of the new up and coming area. I've seen a lot of first time home buyers buying in Southeast, especially the adjacent portion to downtown that's pretty walkable, just across 581. And then, you know, I think we're going to start to see that economic overflow trickle from downtown towards Benton through Southeast. So, you know, I think that it's the stigma, it's going to take some learning curve for us, some stigma control too, about, you know, advising clients on up and coming areas that are going to see some gentrification. So, you know, I live on Day Avenue, and I remember not being from here, I had no stigma with Day Avenue. But I know everybody that grew up here is like, oh no, you don't want to live on Day Avenue. Don't live over there. It's not a great place to live. However, you know, we bought $100,000 Foursquare and put 190,000 into it, and it's now just appraised for 426. So we're seeing that growth. I mean, and it's both in new sales, but it's also in, and when we bought this in 3 years ago now. So we're also seeing that growth in existing homes. I can see you talking. I think you have your microphone, or I think you're muted though. Oh, okay, sorry. Anybody have any questions at this point?
I do.
Hi.
Hi. So can you break down that statistic that you gave about the 2 months to recoup the equity? Like, what percentage were you basing that on? I'd like some more information.
Sure. So in general, the average, you know, let's do some quick math. So let's say we have a $200,000 home and we have a $15,000 escalation clause. So that's only a 7.5% increase over the sales price. And obviously the larger the home sales price, the larger that, you know, the lower that percentage. In general, when we're seeing about 13 to 14 and maybe even 14% growth over next year, that 7.5% increase in your new sales price, you're going to recoup that in between 2 and 6 months, depending on how fast the market increases. So the nice thing is if you keep that 13% growth number in mind, and you take your contingency and divide it by your sales price, you get that new percentage increase, and you'll be able to tell people, you know, this is a 7.5% increase. Given 13% increase year over year, it's only going to take you roughly 6 months to recoup. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, great. So
Did that help?
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Thank you.
yeah, of course, of course. I mean, it's all percentage based, right? If you just do and also I'm always happy to help do those calculations if you guys have some questions. So please, you know, whether it's my transaction or not, I'm always available for you to reach out to. So the next piece is, or there's a couple more pieces I want to talk about what makes this different than the 2008 mortgage crisis, because I know that talking about year over year growth and inventory is probably not the only thing that's going to ease some of those worries. So another thing that was really impactful for me in 2008, 90% of buyers or of homeowners had like 95% loan to value. It's something outrageous where the average loan to value in that mortgage crisis period, because people were putting basically no money down and paying way overpaying for homes in this frenzy of basically anybody can buy a house. People were leaving with no home equity to fall back on if they got themselves into trouble. Nowadays, 40% of home buyers have over $200,000 in equity, or homeowners have over $200,000 in equity in their houses. That's huge. And what that means is we have almost half of the population in the country has at least $200,000 in their home value to fall back on during economic hardship. So you've got a fantastic safety net for a lot of people. And you know, that's about 50% of the total homeowners, right? The other 50 still has equity because it's virtually impossible to buy a 100% financed home nowadays. So a lot of people still have a lot of good equity in their houses. That just did not exist at the start of the mortgage crisis. You had people who were getting upside down in their houses because you had a plummeting in market prices across the country. And then you had people with no equity. So those plummeting prices just doubly hurt people. because there was just no money there for them to fall back on. The other piece that I think is really interesting to bring up is forbearance. So I've heard a lot of people say, well, forbearance is going to cause a market decrease because, forbearance is going to cause a mortgage bubble because people are going to start defaulting on their houses. That is just not how forbearance works. So forbearance, as you all probably know, is when, everybody's eligible for it. Even if you make $300,000 a year, you're eligible for forbearance on your mortgage. And what it means is you can choose to go into forbearance. Luckily, it doesn't happen automatically, but people can choose to go into it, and their mortgage payments, essentially, that money owed goes into a separate non-interest bearing escrow account. Essentially, you can call it a home equity line, you can call it an escrow account, you can call it whatever you want. It goes into a separate account from what your normal principal balance on your mortgage is. Now, what happens with that money is that when your property is either refinanced or sold, that money goes away. Now, that piece does have to get absorbed into the market, right? It's money that just disappears. No money just disappears. It has to get absorbed into the market. But the good news is that forbearance is not going to all happen at once, right? So the people that chose to go in forbearance and have those basically piggyback accounts that are going to get forgiven, some people are going to do it in a year when they refinance. Some people are going to do it in 20 years when they pay off their mortgage. Some people are going to do it in 2 months when they sell their house, right? So it's a staggering effect. You're not going to see this effect where it was, suddenly 100 million homeowners go into default because of forbearance and add all of that defaulted money to the market. It's going to happen gradually and slowly. So that piece, forbearance really isn't going to play a factor on the mortgage crisis either. So it's just really positive for me. I think it's really reassuring too, to know that none of these indicators are showing us a housing crisis coming up. In fact, it's mostly all showing us exactly the opposite, that we're going to see nothing but economic growth in the housing industry over the next probably 2 to 5 years. So get ready for lots of sales and lots of buyers, because I think that that's really the only direction that we're headed, especially in 2022 when we start to see decreasing rates again.
Okay.
Any questions on forbearance? Hey.
I do. Okay, so if I have a client that says they can't sell their house because their an expensive system has gone out in their house and they can't afford to replace it just yet, I'm not sure I understand how forbearance works. Is there any information that you can send me that maybe they can get everything up to snuff, get the house on the market, and then they...
Well, so the hard part about forbearance is this. So forbearance, essentially, as a homeowner with a mortgage, you can basically tell your loan servicer, I want to go into forbearance. The federal government has made it open to any homeowner in the country, and they pause your mortgage payments. So essentially, you go several months without making a mortgage payment. The problem is when they turn around to buy a house, purchasers that have had a forbearance, while Fannie and Freddie don't have any rules against it, all of the investors have put COVID overlays on these forbearance loans. Nobody wants to buy a mortgage if people have forbearance on their credit report, because they don't want that to happen to them in the future, right? They don't want people to have forbearance, they don't want people to do that to future investors. So, there are very few, if no investors that I can think of off the top of my head that are buying loans from people that were in forbearance. So I get what you're getting at. It would be great to be able to do that and then put that money towards an expensive system fix. The problem with that is they're going to struggle to purchase because they've gone into forbearance. So I would never advise your client.
They can get out of one house, but they can't get into the next.
Exactly. So I would never advise you to tell your clients to do forbearance. There's lots of other ways they can think about it. So for instance, if they have that home equity, they can look at doing a home cash out refinance or a home equity line to take that money and put it back into the house to fix that system. And then in 6 months, turn around and sell it, right? Generally 6 months is the asking period for when they do a refinance or a home equity line, because anything else, it's called an EPO. We have to pay back our commissions if the if the loan is paid off prior to 6 payments being made. But that's really.
So they have to keep the house on a home equity. They have to keep the house 6 months.
In
Pretty
general,
much.
That's a favor we ask. It's not a requirement. There are no prepayment
Uh-huh.
penalties. So they are more than welcome to do it and pay it off. However, it's more just a courtesy to the people who live in the money, to the people like me.
Right.
The other thing they can think about doing is there's so many renters right now because of the amount of the shortage in inventory. So there's really, I think if they did that and they wanted to rent for 6 months, remember, if we have a lease, we don't have to count that mortgage payment against them. So they could potentially qualify to purchase another home. Let's say they were going to purchase another home with 5% down, right? Because they had all that equity tied up in their old house, but they wanted to wait that 6 months or a year for the home equity line or the refinance to have made sense for both the cap closing costs and that EPO that I was talking about. So if they buy that house in, using 5% down and they have a lease on their old property, so we don't have to count that payment against them, they can, once they sell that house, do what's called a recast. Now, a recast on a mortgage is when somebody makes a large lump sum payment to their principal balance, and it re-amortizes their loan based off of the remaining term of the loan. So let's say they have 350 payments left on a 30-year fixed mortgage, and they go and they make a $200,000 lump payment towards a $350,000 remaining balance or principal balance. What then happens is that remaining balance of like 150,000, they take the remaining payments of 350 payments at the same interest rate and re-amortize the loan, so it significantly lowers their monthly payment.
Okay.
That's another great example of how you.
Any loan can do the recast?
There are a few investors that will not allow recasts, but if you go into it knowing that, we can exclude any investors that don't allow it to make sure they're lined up with a recast investor.
Okay.
I've had a lot of clients do that too to write non-contingent offers on their houses. So they'll put minimum down. And in this market, as you know, contingent offers are not really even getting looked at. So a lot of people are doing minimum down on the homes so they don't have to sell their current homes and either renting it out or just waiting to put it on the market until after they buy the new one and then doing those recast payments. And you don't have to recast either. The other nice thing is you can put that, if it's a really well-qualified client, a comfortable income bracket, people can actually just pay all that money towards their principal and pay their loan off faster.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, Anastasia had a message in the chat window. She actually did a forbearance on one of her properties last year. Let's see. Her experience was that she applied to purchase a second rental property and could only make that go through if she took the other property out of forbearance and paid back the payments.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was a requirement of the lender for her to be able to qualify for the second purchase of the other rental unit.
Oh, that's great to know.
She
Yeah.
had some experience there with it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's forbearance is a tricky thing, right? It helps a lot of people that are in really, obviously there's a lot of people that are just either laid off right now or out of work. So it's a great tool for those people, but it can be tricky because I think the problem is that they're not doing a good job of when you go into forbearance of explaining those little details like that you have to, there's rules around it, right? So I think a lot of people are rushing into it or doing it because they're in an economic hardship and they don't fully understand the result when they're ready to come out of it or do something different in real estate. So the next piece I want to talk about is the affordability myth. So a lot of, with these increasing home prices, and now increasing rates through 2021, a lot of people that I've spoke to, both agents and clients, are worried about people being able to purchase homes because they're not going to now be able to afford it. Well, the nice thing is that when you only talk about numbers, it's hard to wrap your head around the exact affordability of a home. But when you convert that over to percentages, like we did with the contingent or the escalation clause, it starts to make a little bit more sense. So with a 10% rise in national household prices, that basically, let's say you have $1,000 a month mortgage payment. That means that your new mortgage payment, if you were to go out and buy now versus the same time last year, would be $1,100 a month. However, the thing that the current weekly wages increase is up by 7.5%. Now, obviously, 10%, 7.5%, there's still a delta. However, when you actually put all that into numbers, let's say that you need you make $500 or $5,000 a month, and that $5,000 a month, you now need to make $5,100 a month to qualify for the same property. That's only a 2% increase in wages versus the 10% increase in houses. So in general, your income increase doesn't need to be very large to translate that into a much larger affordability increase in a home price. So, and we're seeing, obviously, if we're having a 7.5% increase in weekly wages, and people only need 2% more to increase their monthly payment by $100 a month, in that circumstance, the affordability of homes is actually not nearly as bad as people might think it is if you just look at the straight percentages or straight numbers. So when you actually break it down into monthly payment versus income, people are able year after year to afford a lot more house than home prices are increasing. So it's just another tool that I find really helpful when I'm helping clients talk about being able to afford homes with these escalation clauses. Generally people will have like that monthly budget max, right? Let's say it's $2,000 a month, but that escalation clause looks really scary when you're already at your top of your monthly budget. That 10,000 escalation clause is only going to bring their monthly payment up by about $20 a month. So when you talk about that and actually put things into perspective versus their income, it can just help people really feel better about doing these escalation clauses to win deals. So it's just, I find the affordability conversation to be a really good tool in your arsenal to help help talk people through how to really win deals right now, and with these escalation clauses that are pretty much have become a standard at this point. Anastasia, I'm reading your question. It looks like you want to hear why lenders have to use 1% of your student loan amount or whatever the formula is instead of the actual amount of the payment borrower makes when pre-qualifying. You've seen this more than once. Lenders using $400 a month as the debt instead of $200. It affects the debt to income and makes borrower qualify for so much less. So that's a fantastic point to bring up. Student loans are really challenging when people are qualifying for loans. In fact, there's a couple of factors at play. That's true for FHA loans right now. However, that is not 1% is not true for conventional loans. So FHA's rules with COVID overlays, FHA used to just be whatever your set monthly payment was. So let's say you were on an actual income-based repayment plan of $0 a month. We used to be able to use that for any program, and we would be able to use $0 payment to anybody. However, FHA has come out and said that anybody that has student loans, you either have to use 1% or the fully amortized payment to count against them. I understand why they've made this rule. In general, what has happened, they're worried about what happens when people have a rise in income and have to start paying more monthly, or they, that $0 is no longer applicable to their income-based repayment plans, and their monthly payment goes up. So what they're trying to do is make sure that people aren't defaulting. However, the problem is the whole point of an FHA loan is to help people purchase homes that have low credit or low income, or a combination of those factors. So I think it's really, it's a little unfair what has happened, kind of to your point, that's the new requirement for FHA. Now, conventional, however, if we can get them above a 640 credit and make the debt to income ratio work, we can do income-based repayment for student loans. So for instance, I had a VHDA buyer recently who told me one thing about their student loans and ended up being something else, which is, totally okay. We had to get really creative though, because the FHA loan that we were doing for them, suddenly their debt to income ratio went from a 40 to a 96, because we had to count the full 1% of their student loans against them, and then information, and there was just some confusion by the buyer on what they were explaining to me with the student loans. So we had to switch them over to a conventional loan program, and then I had her call her student loan company, it's just Navient in this case, which handles a lot of the federal student loans, and they were able to get her on an income-based repayment plan of $0 a month through August of 2022. And what that allowed us to do is not count any student loans against her and bring her debt to income ratio down even better than what we had it originally doing the FHA loan. So, while her monthly payment is going to be a little bit higher, as well as her rate, because, FHA was providing that lower rate and set mortgage insurance, it still allows her to buy the house, which she can't afford, right? So it really, we've got a lot of creative options available with student loans. So don't get wrapped around the 1% until you know if your buyer can qualify for conventional or not, because that's really a lifesaver in a lot of these situations with these student loans right now.
For conventional, what are the debt to income ratios that are, like, let's say, maximum in the same way with FHA?
Sure. So FHA and VA, we can generally get a debt to income ratio. So it really depends on a number of things. It depends on your total risk factor or risk profile for your loan, right? If somebody has 18 student loans, they have derogatory accounts, their credit score is 660, and their income is like, $35,000 a year. If we can make the FHA program work, they'll go up to generally about a 45 debt to income ratio for that type of person. Oh. FHA and VA, we're actually getting debt to income ratios approved up above 50% if the borrower doesn't have a lot of other derogatory factors, right? So if they're really only using those programs because they need a low down payment, or their credit score is maybe just not established enough yet to have a high score, we're seeing those get approved up above 50% debt to income ratio. Wow. It really, though, if you have a borrower that has a lot of negative factors at play, we're really going to want to stick closer to that 40 to 45 range to really get them through underwriting. Now, a couple of factors can help strengthen their credit profile. A larger down payment, for instance. So instead of doing 3.5% down or 0% down on a VA loan, let's say it's a 5% down payment. That can help push us through at a higher debt to income ratio because it's a little more skin in the game. But in general, for conventional, on the other side of that, we can get, I have a buyer that's really well qualified right now, purchasing at a 46% debt to income ratio with 5% down on a conventional loan. Their credit profile is strong enough and their income is strong enough that they're getting that acceptance. However, I do have conventional clients who are on the other end of that spectrum, who maybe have a few derogatory accounts or medical collections, things like that, where they're doing 5% down, and the max that we're getting is a 42 debt to income ratio approval. Mm-hmm. So really, I think, it really depends on the factor, but, if you've got a well-qualified buyer, and especially a well-qualified buyer who knows they have pay increases coming up. Maybe they know they're getting a promotion next year. Little things like that, and they're comfortable taking that debt to income ratio up to that 50% mark. If we're able to get them through on an FHA or VA loan, those are fantastic programs to be able to get people in those top ranges, especially as they're competing on these houses. Anybody else have questions?
I do have a question.
Sure.
We've talked about the escalation clause quite a bit today. You being in the industry, of course, on your end, how are appraisals coming in? Because I know that's kind of a concern for some when you're going, $15,000, $20,000 over ask price, because I feel like in this market, listing agents are pushing that list price for their sellers, or sellers are pushing it, however you want to word it. So how are you seeing appraisals come in when there are the escalation clauses in place, that much over? Are we having to amend? Are they coming in where they need to be?
That's a great question, and one that I get a lot. Appraisals are really coming in right on track with the contract. There are a handful of appraisers out there, that I've worked with over the past couple of months who are giving us a hard time on refinances. Most are fair. Most are saying, okay, I know that it would sell today for this amount of money, but I am having a few appraisers out there who are really being super cautious. And, I was actually talking to Ashley about this at one day, and I think she brought up a really good point. Appraisers took a really, really big unfair brunt of the blame for the 2008 mortgage crisis. Obviously a lot of them were at fault. However, I don't think any of them were nearly at fault as maybe your Wells Fargo or the larger banks that were giving predatory loans out. That's a topic for another day. But you do have a lot of appraisers who are being really hesitant on refinances, especially cash out. However, I'm racking my brain. I think I've only had one purchase come in under appraised in the past 3 months. And it was at Smith Mountain Lake. But in the end, they were able to come to an agreement with the seller that made sense for both parties. So, I think as long as they're not waiving their appraisal contingencies, that's the one that always makes me a little nervous. So, I think maybe they're willing to pay $5,000 more if the appraisal comes in low, so they're able to apply that appraisal contingency with a cap, for instance, or they have, they're just really sure of that. I think the better contingencies, in my perspective, are always to waive inspection and those other ones that can then be negotiated if there's like a huge major problem. So that's really where I'm seeing appraisals come back. I think that we're really not seeing a huge problem, especially in the purchase market.
Great. And being in the office, we do see all of the companies' contracts come across our desk. And we are actually seeing some that have waived that appraisal contingency up to a certain amount. And it just makes me nervous.
Yeah.
Heart goes pitter patter because, do they really understand what they're doing? I don't know.
I think people are getting desperate. I really do. I think that you have a lot of buyers who are either really up against the line where they need to purchase because they're going to be homeless, or you have buyers that are just tired and they're like, I'm so tired of looking at houses, so tired of losing contracts. And so, if you have those homes that are a guaranteed sure thing, right? Let's say it's a house with a $20,000 escalation fee in South Roanoke. It's a beautiful home. There were multiple offers on it. I think waiving that appraisal contingency is probably not very risky. If you're talking about a house maybe in Southeast that's going for $20,000 or $30,000 over, and a buyer that just doesn't have the liquid cash to be able to make up that delta, that's when you really need to be conservative. I think it really just depends on the client itself. We got another thing. It makes me nervous to hold my breath until appraisal comes back. Wow, on a double wide, $180,000 with multiple offers on a double wide. That's amazing. I mean, it truly is amazing what home prices are doing right now.
What is happening is crazy. It really is.
Yeah. It's but I think going back to what I said earlier, I think it really is overdue in Roanoke. I think it's really, I was actually, my partner and I actually own a business, Crafteria, if everybody's heard of it, downtown. And excuse me, I'm sorry. We're on the Roanoke City Tourism Board, or Blue Ridge, Visit Virginia Blue Ridge, a call with them the other day, and they were talking about tourism numbers in Roanoke. And it's astounding year after year growth for tourism numbers here. They're like doubling. I mean, it's amazing how many people are discovering Roanoke. And I think it just goes hand in hand with our increasing home prices. So I know it makes me feel a lot better when I see those home price increases and those escalation clauses. So it's always good to have those talking points with your clients.
Very good.
Market most buyers. So I'm just taking a quick look at my notes. So really, I think, the last point that I had was the overpaying piece, right? But I think we covered that a little bit from previous questions. So, I think the biggest thing that I like to stress is with my clients when they're getting, I have especially first-time home buyers who struggle with, I'm not overpaying for a house. I'm not putting that escalation clause in. I want, $5,000 below sales price and $5,000 in seller credits. And, it's hard to have that conversation with buyers on your end, especially because you are in a client forward position, right? So I've stepped in to have that conversation sometimes where I've had, been able to tell people, look, like, this is just the new reality of purchasing a home. But when you talk them through both what we talked about in recouping that cost over time, and then the cost of waiting. I have buyers that have waited and, didn't want to put that escalation clause in this summer, could have done it, could have gotten the house at 2.5%, and now they're looking at 3.25%. And while not a huge increase and still historically well or great, what are we going to look like in another 3 to 6 months? People need to just understand that the sales prices are not getting any better. We're only going to continue to see increases in sales prices and rates until probably mid next year. So when I'm talking to clients, I just find that a really useful tool to be able to help. So that's really all I had for you all today. Is there any other general lending questions or things about that we've talked about? I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions.
What if somebody's looking for a home that they can fix up so that they can grow their equity for a future, their first-time home buyers? What loan would you recommend for them?
That's a great question.
Can they borrow money to do the fixing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So,